Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Garrison Institute's live interactive webinar. Today, our guest is Rick Hanson. Rick Hanson is a psychologist, senior fellow of UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, and New York Times best-selling author. His books include Neurodharma, Resilient, Hardwiring Happiness, Buddha's Brain, and Mother Nature, with over 900,000 copies in English alone. He's lectured at NASA, Google, Oxford, and Harvard, and taught in meditation centers worldwide. An expert on positive neuroplasticity, his work has been featured on the BBC, CBS, NPR, and other major media. He began meditating in 1974 and is the founder of Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom. Before we begin today's session, I'll go over a few logistical items about our gathering. We are on a Zoom webinar, so participant video and audio are turned off. You'll only see Rick and for the time being myself. For anyone unable to attend live, we are recording these sessions. You'll have a chance to view the recordings as well as a schedule of upcoming programs at garrisoninstitute.org. We offer these sessions free of charge as a goodwill gesture to support our community during such times of heightened uncertainty. We would welcome donations of any amount to help continue these sessions. Thank you. Finally, we'll have time for Q&A during this gathering. You can post your questions in the Q&A panel along the bottom of your screen if you hover your arrow and click on Q&A. We're on for an hour today, and we'll respond to as many questions as we can. Please forgive us if we're unable to get to your question. Thank you again, Rick, for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Jane, and thank you, everyone who's enabled this to happen, and thank all of you for participating. I have a lot of appreciation for Garrison and respect for it, and the lineage, in effect, that it stands in. And I just feel happy that we have this opportunity to be together in this way, and grateful for Garrison as an institution for being such a platform, honestly, and a refuge in so many ways. At any time, and including in our turbulent and sometimes troubled times currently. What I hope to do here is talk with you about the intersection of the deepest wisdom that I know of, and also the coolest, most recent, most interesting brain science, and the intersection of those, the combination of those. And that combination is summarized in this made-up word, neurodharma. We can know ourselves from the inside out through psychology and contemplative practice. We can also know ourselves from the outside in through science, biology, and neuroscience. And the intersection of those two, where they two meet, is neurodharma. And it's a space where there are a lot of very powerful, useful ideas for how to be and how to grow, both toward the peaks of human potential, the mountain of awakening, while also, meanwhile, down here in the trenches, in the middle of a plague, actually, moving through our country, America, and moving through the world as a whole, how can we find our footing, and how can we stabilize our own capabilities in the present? How can we manage anxiety? How can we deal with frustration and loss? And meanwhile, how can we retain a fundamental sense of inner peace, courageous love, and contentment in our very beings? Hardwired, fundamentally, physically, into the tissues of the living body in a truly, objectively embodied way. How do we actually do that? So what I hope to do is offer a few perspectives, take us through a bit of an experiential practice that will give me a chance to kind of comment on or illustrate some of the points that I'm making, and then open it up for your questions, your comments, and some discussion. We'll end right at the top of the hour. I'm in California right now, so many people, I think, are on the East Coast of America. So we'll end your time locally, East Coast, 5 p.m., 1 p.m. for me. I got that wrong. 4 p.m. for you, 1 p.m. for me. Okie doke. What I'd like to do, if I could, is read you a few paragraphs from my book as a kind of efficient way to orient us to this material, and then we'll get into the details. So here's my book. I love the cover. The Mountain of Awakening illustrates things. What can we learn from people who speak to us from the peak of human possibility? The great sages, the great teachers throughout history. What can we learn from their example? How can we study them? And then, to put it a certain kind of way, reverse engineer what is going on inside them in respectful and meaningful ways so that wherever we find ourselves, we can help ourselves progress in our own path of awakening. How can we actually do that? So if I could, if you'll indulge me here briefly, it'll be short. I'm going to read the first couple paragraphs of the book. I've hiked a lot in the mountains, and sometimes a friend farther up the trail has turned and looked back and encouraged me onward. Such a friendly gesture. Come join me. Watch out for the slippery ice. You can do it. I've often thought about those moments while writing this book, which is about the heights of human potential, about being as wise and strong, happy and loving as any person can ever be. If those heights are like a great mountain, awakening is the magnificent journey that carries you along toward the top. Many real people have gone very far up, the great sages and teachers throughout history, as well as others no one has heard about, and I imagine them turning with a sweet smile and beckoning us to join them. Those who have climbed this mountain come from different cultures and have different personalities, but they all seem alike to me in 7 ways. They are mindful. They are kind. They live with a contentment and emotional balance through even the hardest times. They are whole and authentic. They are present here and now. They speak of feeling connected with everything, and a light shines through them that does not seem entirely their own. Remarkably, you can see some of their qualities already deep down inside yourself, even if they're sometimes covered over by stresses and distractions. These ways of being are not reserved for the few. They are opportunities for all of us, and we can develop them in these 7 practices of awakening. In other words, we can practice what we long to be, or we can practice what we already are. So these 7 practices, which is what I'll be talking about right now, are steadying the mind, warming the heart, resting in fullness, by which I mean equanimity and contentment, being wholeness, accepting yourself fully as you are, feeling undivided, resting in a sense of being as the space in which doing is occurring, while receiving nowness, really living in the front edge of now continually, even as experiences pass on by, while opening into allness. That's the 6th practice, my poetic way of describing a sense of interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh puts it, a sense of feeling that we each are a local expression of everything, so that increasingly we take life less personally, and instead of feeling separated and beleaguered, we feel buoyed and supported by life altogether, while in the 7th practice, finding timelessness, having an intuition of or a sense of spaciousness, stillness, and possibility, certainly within our own being and within the ordinary Big Bang universe, and possibly reaching beyond the ordinary reality into what is transcendentally timeless, eternal, and unchanging, the ultimate ground. So this is the territory here, and for each one of these, including the finding of timelessness, I explore most recent plausible neuroscience. Neuroscience is a baby science. There's so much we don't know. It's important to have a kind of modesty about all that. On the other hand, we know more than nothing. And if we have to know everything about a topic, then we can't say anything at all. And so plausibly, I explore in this material what we can understand of what is going on inside our own brains, inside our own bodies, when we are really kind of dropped in, stable, present, calm, contented, open-hearted, self-accepting, really present in the now, feeling that connectedness with everything, with respect, ultimately, for mystery. How do we actually do that? How do we take those steps up the mountain of awakening? So I say here that the complete development of these 7 ways of being marks the pinnacle of human possibility, which could be called enlightenment or full awakening. Meanwhile, even the first simple sense of them is very useful in everyday life. For instance, while dealing with stressful challenges, such as these days, it's so good to rest in the fullness of feeling already peaceful, happy, and loved. And whether it is for the beginning of the path or its end, today we have an unprecedented opportunity to explore a kind of reverse engineering of awakening that is grounded in the living body. So at this point, what I'd like to do is a little experiential practice with you. If you want to do it, I call it the 3 breaths practice. It'll take a little more than 3 breaths for me to take you through it. Then I'll explain plausibly some of what's happening inside your body or brain while you do this. And then we'll do it again, just in a row, 3 breaths. And then I think after that, I may make another few comments, but then I'll open it up for discussion. Because I suspect there will be some rich questions and comments coming in about this material. So you want to try something? You want to try it experientially? As with anything, as the Buddha taught a long time ago, see for yourself what is valuable for you, what has the ring of truth for you, and what bears fruit for you over time. And if there's anything I'm saying that doesn't make sense to you, just toss it aside. And also feel really free to adapt my suggestions to your own needs and to what really works for you. In this format, in an online program, I'm going to use language, I'm going to use words and imagery to suggest ways into experiences. There are many other ways into experiences, such as through movement, dance, singing, many different kinds of practices. And that's a way also of pointing to just the fact that I'm teaching from my own perspective. I'm teaching from a fair amount of privilege, a lot of good fortune. It's going to leave, therefore, important things out. Just because I'm leaving them out doesn't mean I disrespect them. It just means I'm limited in what I can teach. And so I invite others, actually, to fill in the blanks with what I'm leaving out or adapt what I'm saying to whatever most deeply speaks to you. To me, there are many routes up the mountain of awakening. I'm mostly trained in the Buddhist tradition, particularly as best we can gather, the teachings of the Buddha himself, summarized in what's called the Theravadan tradition, sometimes called the Vipassana tradition as Buddhism has moved into the West. I have a lot of interest in the evolution of Buddhism in its Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, and Pure Land forms, but my own training is there. So that's one route up the mountain. There are other routes up the mountain of awakening too. Sufism, Judaism, contemplative practices in Christianity, the first people, indigenous native people traditions around the world, really important there. Secular mindfulness, routes up the mountain of awakening, many different routes. And ultimately, as people converge on the summit, they seem more and more like each other. And that's what's most important to me. They even start talking about similar things. So there's a convergence up here because there's sort of a universal applicability of the pinnacle of human possibility. And also, since we have one basic human body and one basic human brain, no matter what the route is that people take, shaped by culture, shaped by religious tradition sometimes, no matter what that route is, I think on all of them, we find the same 7 steps taken again and again and again. We observe the cultivation, the refinement, the perfection, ultimately, of these 7 qualities of being. I'm not saying that they are everything about enlightenment or awakening, but they sure are a meaningful part of it. So no matter which route you take, again and again, I'm still on the way. Steps of steadiness, lovingness, fullness, wholeness, nowness, allness, and timelessness. So in that spirit, let's try 3 breaths. So, and by the way, if there's anything uncomfortable for you about doing this while focusing on breathing or the sensations of the body, which is often the case, especially for people with a trauma history, feel free to do something else. You might be aware of the room as a whole rather than your body. You might also focus on sensations other than breathing if you want to, or just skip the sensations in the body part altogether and adapt this to your own purposes. Okay, here we go. So the first breath is breathing while feeling your chest as a whole. So exhaling and then taking a breath while feeling your chest as a whole. In the second breath, breathing while feeling caring, bringing to mind pets, friends, children, others you care about, you feel compassion for maybe, perhaps even love. You might want to have a sense of the area around your heart, perhaps putting your hand on your heart. So breathing while feeling caring and just focusing on the feeling, dropping beneath the story, the complexities, just going into the feeling one way or another. In the second breath, breathing while caring. Okay. And then in the third breath, breathing while feeling cared about. This might be a little challenging in the beginning to just call up, but with practice, it'll become more natural. Bringing to mind the feeling of being among friends or colleagues, sense of teamwork, you're included, maybe appreciated, people who respect you or are grateful to you or like you, maybe even cherish and love you. So breathing while feeling cared about, the third breath. Okay. So a little bit of an explanation to illustrate some broader points. There's a famous saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. This is the 2-stage process of any kind of lasting healing, development, growth, transformation, social emotional learning, or awakening. Milarepa had a teaching that summarized this journey. He's a great Tibetan sage living 1,000 or so years ago. He was describing his life of practice, which we can also apply to any particular thing that we're trying to develop in ourselves, such as greater resilience or gratitude or happiness. He said, in the beginning, nothing came. In the middle, nothing stayed. In the end, nothing left. So for example, in the beginning, I may say to you, oh, be aware of your chest as a whole as you breathe, and it doesn't come. Or, oh, feel caring or cared about, doesn't come. Okay. In the second stage, especially with a little practice, we're able to deliberately evoke or open into certain experiences, such as feeling your chest as a whole. But they're not yet traits. They're not yet stabilized in us to have trait gratitude or trait mindfulness or trait happiness. It's not yet stabilized. It's not staying. But by the end, in that third stage, typically with repetition and with practice, it's there. It's there. It's in the background. It's in the wallpaper of the mind. It's in the background of sort of my mood or what it's like to be me. Other things may be alongside it, amidst an underlying deep feeling of inner peace and contentment and warm-heartedness. Could well be stress or pressure, pain in your body, worry about others, moral outrage at the time we're in, whatever else might be there. But deep in the core of your being, there's this unshakable quality that gets cultivated over time of a fundamental contentment, love, and inner peace. How do we develop that over time? this goes back to neurons that fire together, wire together, and the importance of helping the wiring to happen so that the experiences we are having actually leave lasting physical residues behind in terms of physical changes of structure and function in our own nervous system. So in terms of the 3 breaths practice that I was doing there, I was slowing it down to keep those neurons firing together so they would have a chance to wire together. I was also focusing on body sensations, which will increase the internalization of the somatic residues, of the emotional residues as well, of important experiences of gratitude or calm or mindfulness or self-worth. And I was highlighting what feels good about the experience, just implicitly in the suggestions I was offering, including focusing on the pleasures, the way it feels good to be caring, and even especially to feel cared about. You'll recognize that in what I was doing here, I did not invent any of these methods. They're routinely used by teachers who are effective, coaches, counselors, therapists, educators, trainers who are effective. It's really important to help learning land, to have the vulnerability and the humility and the receptivity for experiences so that they don't just wash through us like water through a sieve, but actually we slow down enough to welcome them into ourselves and to receive them into ourselves, not out of clinging and craving, but in fact the opposite, since as we satisfy the longings in our heart, the genuine, important longings in our heart in deep ways, as we fulfill them, well, gradually those hungers fall away because we feel fed already. And then we approach life with enthusiasm and passion and moral commitment and effort and diligence and all the rest of it. We approach life in that way on the basis already of an underlying sense of fullness and balance. It's pretty good. So in terms of those 3 breaths, I'll kind of summarize a little neuroscience about them. Then we'll do it one last time, and then I'll open it up for questions and comments. So feeling your chest as a whole does several things right there that are very good for managing times where we feel stressed or even upset. First, bringing awareness to the internal sensations of the chest expanding and contracting engages a part of the brain called the insula that's involved with tuning into ourselves. And when we engage the insula to tune into ourselves, that reduces activity neurologically in a part of the brain that's the basis for the so-called default mode network, which is where we go when we're ruminating, when we're worried about the future or resenting the past. And when we tune into our bodies, it's like a circuit breaker that decreases default mode network activity, which also helps to bring us into the present because we're not doing mental time travel anymore, which is sustained by these midline networks, and particularly the default mode. And also, when we tune into pure sensation, we naturally kind of counterbalance or dial up the volume, as it were, of the sense of sensation in the brain while dialing down verbal activity, that yammering, chattering voice that's useful some of the time, but a little bit of that goes a long way. Right there, bringing your attention to the feeling of your chest as a whole. Additionally, when we get a sense of things as a whole, a sense of things as a gestalt, that both tends to engage the right hemisphere of the brain for right-handed people, switched for many left-handed people, but the principle's the same. The hemisphere, for most people, that's involved in holistic gestalt processing, the sense of things as a whole, your chest as a whole, and the right hemisphere is connected like a seesaw, sort of, through reciprocal inhibition to the left hemisphere, which is specialized for sequential processing rather than holistic gestalt processing. Thus, language, for most people, comprehension and production of language are centered in the left side of the brain. Well, as we increase activity in the right hemisphere, that tends to naturally decrease activity in the left hemisphere, thus less verbal chatter and yammering that can make us feel stressed or preoccupied. Also, interestingly, when you go into that sense of things as a whole, the networks on the right side of the brain that get involved with that naturally also decrease activity in networks in the midline of the brain, the frontal portions of which are involved with stressful task doing, the rear, the default mode network, the ruminator, essentially, of our own brain. And what happens then is that as this midline activity decreases, as we get a sense of things as a whole, you just watch your own mind. It brings you right into the present, because midline activity is very much the basis for, or is a major basis for, mental time travel, not being in the present. So going into the sense of things as a whole, whoop, brings you into the present and reduces the self-referential chatter that is so prolific and proliferated in these midline networks. So we don't take things so personally. We don't feel so beleaguered or put upon or possessive. My precious, right? One breath, doing all those things for us with a sense of our torso as a whole. Then, in terms of feeling caring and cared about, there are a lot of benefits in that, including the ways in which the amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, has receptors in it for oxytocin. And those receptors, which receive the oxytocin neurochemical that is whose activity is increased when we're feeling positive relationship type experiences, those receptors in the amygdala are inhibitory. They're like the brakes in a car. They calm things down. They slow it down, which is one reason why often when we feel heartfelt, whether it's flowing out or flowing in, when we're feeling heartfelt, it tends to help us feel less upset, helps us kind of come back to center, to experience that secure base inside us in terms of attachment theory, of positive relationships with others. Research also shows that when people have increased sense of oxytocin activity, or there's more oxytocin activity related to the sense of positive relatedness with others, that acts in the prefrontal regions behind the forehead also in a way that lowers anxiety. So, feeling connected to others is a primal signal of safety, including going all the way back to the Stone Age. That's pretty good. And last, the vagus nerve complex, you may have heard of that through Steve Porges' fantastic work in polyvagal theory. Basically, to summarize a lot of stuff, has two branches originating in the kind of the brainstem. One branch goes down, regulates heart and lungs and the viscera. It's calming and soothing in its major effect. And then the second branch goes up, moves into the brain and also into our face and ears and eyes, and it's very involved with the social engagement system. This means that, since these two branches are connected, when we open to positive relational experiences of feeling caring and cared about, activity in the social engagement network ripples down the vagus nerve complex and tends to calm us down and center us and slow the heart rate and help us feel stronger and calmer, more grounded and centered, which is a wonderful basis upon which to meet the challenges of life. Simply that. So in just 3 breaths, all that going on. One reason I'm just kind of talking through that is to illustrate the broader point that while clearly the Buddha did not need an MRI to become enlightened, nor have countless others throughout history and in the present day needed an MRI or an EEG to progress very far in their own path of awakening, perhaps even all the way to the irrevocable pinnacle of that possibility. We don't need an MRI for that. On the other hand, we've learned a few things in the last 2,500 years, especially the last 25 years, about the underlying bodily basis for the most important, the most beautiful, the most useful, the healthiest states of mind. And it seems to me really inconsistent, certainly with Buddhism, which recognizes ignorance and delusion as deep roots of suffering. It also seems inconsistent with the spirit of science to recognize what is true. It seems inconsistent with all that to not at least draw upon what's useful that we can learn from science these days, if only to motivate us to do certain practices, because we now understand better how the machinery is working and why they work. Okay, so let's try it again. 3 breaths, just continuously. I'll offer very little instruction here. It will be mostly nonverbal. And then let's kind of hang out for another minute or so afterward, as if you like, continuing this 3 breaths practice, or just letting the benefits of it continue to reverberate inside you and ripple inside you. And then I'll open it up for questions and discussion. So if you have questions or comments, please send them in through the Q&A. There we are, the Q&A thingamajigger. And if you have any questions about how to do all that, I'm sure the people at Garrison can help you. All right, 3 breaths, and I'll do it with you. So first breath, feeling your chest as a whole. Breathing while caring. Breathing while feeling cared about. And then taking another minute or so, however you like. As we finish, I'll ring a bell. Okay, so there's a Q&A function, and questions are already starting to come in. Really excellent. Okay, great. So the first question, I'll read it. And by the way, I don't know what I should do. Maybe they'll tell me admission control, but if you put your name in, I think I'll decide, even if you put your name in, I won't use it, just so we kind of respect people's privacy here, including in the recording of this. Okay, so Q&A. Wonderful questions already starting to come in. First one, how would you frame the first breathing exercise, in other words, in the chest, for those experiencing trauma? Wonderful question. Understandably, people who've been traumatized, and I'm kind of trigger warning here a little bit, I'll be a little vague, but, if you've ever gone through experiences in which it was, for various reasons, hard to breathe, or, you were perhaps being attacked in some way, it's understandable then later on if a teacher suggests, oh, be aware of the sensations of breathing, and it associates to a lot of fear or understandable block. So how to work around that. I think it's useful to appreciate there are almost an endless series of potential objects of attention. I think of the object of attention, classically the feeling of breathing, but sometimes other things, such as a feeling of loving kindness or gratitude, or an image of a teacher or benefactor, divine being sometimes, maybe a word, a mantra. These are just different objects of attention. And I think of them a little bit as if I were, bobbing up and down in a nice, warm, perfectly comfortable tropical sea with my arm resting on a buoy. The object of attention is like a buoy. And as the, breath rises and falls, or as the waves of experiences come and go, sounds, sensations, thoughts, memories, etc., I stay in touch with the buoy so I'm not swept away by the waves. And there you are hanging out with a buoy and sometimes some very strange creatures, thoughts, images, stuff swims on by, some of it painful, poignant, terrible, but because we're staying in contact with our neutral, if ideally somewhat positive object of attention, we're not hijacked, we're not carried away. So it's useful to have an object of attention. In the beginning of contemplative practice, meditation, we tend to need to exercise a certain amount of deliberate effort to stay in touch with the object of attention or return to it if one of those waves has carried us away. With practice and development, both in the short term, like during a meditation retreat, and with long-term practice, we're able to stay more and more in touch with the object of attention naturally, kind of automatically, with the less and less deliberate top-down effort. All right, so any object of attention can serve that function. The breath is not special in that regard. So for someone who's grappling with trauma, how can they, and I'm going to name something that's interesting here, how can they help themselves maybe tap into the power, the usefulness of getting in touch with breathing, but in a way that's not triggering? And I think a very useful way to do this, that you can explore, obviously, and if it doesn't work for you, step out of it in a jiffy. But what might work is to focus on the feeling of the truth in the moment when it's true, and it usually is. The truth in the present that your body is basically okay. You're basically all right now. There is enough air to breathe. Your heart is still beating. You are going on being. Awareness is still occurring. You can figure stuff out. You can help yourself. You're okay right now. Far from perfect. Pain here, worry there, irritation in the corner, or maybe not in the corner, maybe in the front of the room, and still, underneath it all, amidst it all, alongside it all, continuously, when it's true, you're basically all right now. That can become the object of meditation, that fundamental sense of all rightness, which for someone with any kind of a trauma history is a fantastic refuge, if you can stabilize in the sense of it, along with often a sense of relief or reassurance, a letting go, like, wow. It can feel almost ecstatic to realize that at least now, no matter what happened then, now I'm basically all right. I'm basically all right now, which of course brings us fully into the present. So I think I'll just leave it there to open it up for discussion with other people and other questions, but that would be a starter if I understood your question correctly. And then a way into, over time, helping oneself recognize that despite the very understandable associations to the past or to the trauma material, not denying it. This is not positive thinking. This is realistic thinking. This is widening the view to recognize what is also true. And also, I'm basically okay right now. There is pain. And also, I'm basically okay right now. And then what happens over time is you kind of build out, in fact, you repeatedly fire those neurons together so they wire together. So you actually start to hardwire a growing felt sense of underlying all rightness, that you can tune into and increasingly colors your consciousness, this underlying sense of all rightness now. Okay. So let's see, more questions. What about the chest space makes it the most beneficial area on which to focus? So I just picked the chest because it seems accessible for people. In a practice I teach, you just start with a small area of sensations of breathing and then move out to a sense of abiding as a whole body breathing. If you can drop into that rapidly, as I think people can who, for example, routinely experience their bodies as a whole, maybe through yoga, Pilates, dance, whatever it might be, then great. And to be really clear, to use the metaphor from the Buddha, these practices, these methods are just rafts. They're techniques. They're vehicles. They're means to an end. We construct them, as in his metaphor, to cross a river of suffering of one kind or another, including the ultimate river of all. And once we get to the other side, though, it's important to not keep carrying your raft around, but to move on from your practice. That said, as a practice, as a method, as a technique, being able to fairly at will, within a few breaths, if not even within a few seconds, to have a felt sense of your body as a whole single unified field of sensation in which many sensations are occurring, I have found that to be a very useful practice. And then you can go wider and wider to bring in sounds and thoughts and sights and then everything until you are with your mind as a whole, consciousness as a whole, including awareness in a non-dual way. There are many little elements in it, but it's experienced as a single non-dual field of consciousness continuously. That's explored in the chapter on the fourth practice of being wholeness, including the references. There are about, I forget, 600 or 800, I lost count, references tucked away in the back, reference notes that go into some of the research about this. But that's the basic idea. And I'll leave it there. So, and if you want, like I said, you can get the sense of wholeness. You don't need to use your body. Body's useful for a variety of reasons, some of which I've already named. You can go just to the sense of the volume of the room you're in, the sense of the room as a whole. Or if you want, you can tap into a method that I talk about in the allness chapter that is related to some of this, where you extend your gaze out toward the horizon. And as you do that, there's a natural decrease in self-referential processing and taking things so personally as you move out more into a sense visually or in your imagination, like a bird's eye view in your imagination, looking at a particular conflict from 10,000 feet, metaphorically, that you're dealing with, let's say, in your personal life. When you move your gaze out in that way, that too, in parallel neurological circuitry, as it were, supports the sense of things as a whole more impersonally, not in a depersonalized, dissociative sense, more in an objective, calmer recognition of everything, just simply by moving your gaze out, if you prefer to use that kind of method. Okay, let me just double check chat, great, and then Q&A. One thing I should say, kind of related to a couple comments that have come in, I have an online program that's based on a 10-day meditation retreat I taught a couple of years ago, and it covers this material in a very experiential way based on video recordings of that meditation retreat and the guided meditations, the talks, lots and lots of bonus material. And you may want to check that out on my website, rickhanson.net, S-O-N, which is in that online program is a wonderful companion to the book. And it's a very experiential way to engage this material because, isn't it true? At the end of the day, ideas are cool. Like, I like ideas, you can probably tell. But at the end of the day, it's experience. Experience is the coin of the realm. Experience. What's it like to be you right now? What's it feel like? How are you? How's it going? That is the most important thing of all. And we develop trait qualities of happiness, love, wisdom, and inner peace, and bone deep inner strength. We develop these by experiencing them viscerally and repeatedly while internalizing those experiences so that gradually we truly cultivate those qualities inside ourselves so that increasingly they are in us, we are in them unconditionally, not based on external conditions. Okay. And you can learn about that online program at my website. All right, let's see. I'm just going to bounce ahead. Okay, very important question here. For the third breathing exercise, I can't find a genuine felt sense of being cared for. Yep. Probably due to a low level but repeated neglect in childhood. Yep. Can you suggest anything? And if I'm understanding what's happening with Valerie's comment here, this is a very important point. As I mentioned kind of briskly, the third step of breathing while feeling cared about is challenging. And it is for many, many people, including for the exact reasons that the person brought up. If we lack that history of experiences, states of being cared about and feeling cared about as children, when we're most vulnerable and most in need of those experiences, then we don't have opportunities to internalize those experiences in emotional memory, somatic memory, social memory, body memory, implicit memory systems are called technically. We don't have opportunities for internalization because we didn't experience it in the first place. Then it's harder to just self-generate states of feeling cared about because we don't have them internalized as traits. All right. What to do about all that? That's a whole huge territory. Some of it shades into therapy. I suspect from the way the question was asked, there's a real understanding of that. What I will say, and it's full of hope, two things. First, we have many opportunities today as adults, even with social isolation, social distancing, even in a difficult life, there are many opportunities every day, authentically, not positive thinking, no rose-colored glasses here, authentically. We have opportunities to experience one of 5 aspects of caring or being cared about. To be included. Are we part of something? Are we part of a community of practice? Are we part of a group of people who appreciate Garrison Institute? Or do we have common ground with others that we're allied with politically? Are we part of a team? Are we part of a floor in an apartment building? Is there a sense of inclusion, of belonging in some minimal way? Second, when we are seen, maybe the other person is not understanding us perfectly, but they're trying, right? I'm trying to understand this question and where it comes from and speaking to it. So there's an effort that's being made. It may not be perfect, but at least we can have a chance to feel seen and understood. Third, do we have chances to feel appreciated? That someone is grateful to us or respect us, they value us, they choose us for something, even if they're not our friend, even if we disagree with them about other stuff, at least in this one area, there is some appreciation for us. That's true. Fourth, liked. Can we feel befriended in some simple way? Maybe we're on the receiving end of kindness or compassion, healthy affection, we're hanging out with those we like, they like us, we like them, we can feel liked. And then last, loved, whether it's in the present or can we pull up the memory, the body memory, the felt sense of being loved or liked, appreciated, seen or included from the past. And then when we have that experience happening, so we recognize the fact that we're cared about in one of those 5 ways, and then we help ourselves feel it. Got to feel it. And then we help ourselves internalize it. Again and again, that's how to fill the hole in your heart. I landed in adulthood, or really my late teens, when I went off to college, with what felt like a ginormous hole in my heart. And, it was huge, honestly. It was very painful and poignant. And for me, it was a huge breakthrough to realize that every day I could throw 1 or more bricks into that hole. I could slowly internalize again and again and again what had been missing for me in my childhood for a variety of reasons. And I could take into myself today some, at least, of what would have been so good to have experienced back then, but just didn't happen. And so in this way, truly, again and again and again and again, we really can fill that hole in our heart. It's a progressive process, but I believe there's a Tibetan proverb that says, if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. Years, there are a lot of years, but the minutes, we can keep going at that. So that's the fundamental process. And then with practice, as we cultivate traits of feeling cared about in various ways, then it's easier to just kind of push the play button in the inner iPod, as it were, and experience them as states. And then as we experience them as states, we have opportunities to reinforce them through taking in the good again and again and again and strengthen them as traits. I have kind of an internal saying that summarizes a lot of stuff. Deal with the bad, turn to the good, take in the good. Those seem like three major ways to function in life. I mean bad, pragmatically. I think it's bad that children are hungry. I think it's good to feed them in simple, pragmatic ways. So deal with the bad, whatever the bad is, as you define it, while also not to deny the bad, not as a spiritual bypass, not as dismissing it or minimizing it in any way, shape, or form. Also turn to the good inside your heart, the good inside the hearts of others, the good that can never be lost in terms of our underlying true nature, the things that still function, the flowers that are still growing, we live in Northern California, we get wild turkeys sometimes in our backyard. Whoa. I feel like Dr. Doolittle sometimes. I don't talk to them, but anyway. The good that's still real, right? Turn to the good and then take it in. Feel it. Keep those neurons firing together so you can internalize it into yourself and gradually fill that hole in your heart and satisfy the hunger there. All right. Another question. Let's see. Somebody said the second time they did the exercise, they wrapped their arms around themselves. That's beautiful, kind of hugging myself. And that helped me feel cared about. Is that kosher? 100%. I don't know if there's like a word for super kosher, but 100%, absolutely. The point is, these ways of experiencing things, they're just different ways. And I mentioned, you might want to put a hand on your heart. I love the fact that you said that, hugging yourself in a beautiful, sweet way. There are many ways into the experiences. And there are also many ways to internalize the experiences. So many ways to turn to the good, including such as hugging yourself to feel more cared about in a lovely, embodied way. And then there are multiple ways to take in the good, such as really helping it sink in, like water moving into a sponge, kind of a warmth moving and spreading inside you. This caring or, feeling cared about or caring sinking in. So yeah, totally kosher. Let's see, are there ways to use these methods to address chronic physical pain exacerbated by stress? So a lot of material about physical pain. One of the origins of the modern kind of mindfulness movement in the West, in part through John Kabat-Zinn's phenomenal, groundbreaking work, was to help people with chronic pain. And one way to deal with chronic pain is to cultivate mindfulness and that sense of spaciousness and disidentification from the pain, and also through mindfulness, a kind of shock absorber or circuit breaker that interrupts, to use the Buddhist metaphor, the second darts we throw ourselves. In other words, our emotional reactions to the physical pain of, understandably, but still in ways that are sometimes can be a burden, a sense of anger at ourselves and others for having pain, a sense of hopelessness, anxiety, fear. It gets added to the raw pain of pain, right? Mindfulness is a resource that helps interrupt that. Well, that's a classic inner strength. Mindfulness is that we can develop. We can develop trait mindfulness over time through the two-stage process of learning. Get those neurons firing through experiencing mindfulness or related factors of calming your body or some regulation of attention that you develop over time, being able to kind of get control of your attention and where it's moving around so you can keep it where you want and pull it away from what's not productive for you, what's not wholesome or useful or wise. So these are factors that of mindfulness that we can experience. We can experience mindfulness itself. And then, very important, in that second necessary step of any lasting value, any lasting learning, slow down to register what mindfulness feels like. Oh, in the body, kathunk. This is what it's like to be mindful. This is what it's like to be identified with awareness in which pain is occurring. This is what that feels like. Oh, I've lost it because I've suddenly started to think about it. Okay, fine. Back to just simply awareness of pain, mindfully. Okay, that's what that feels like. Also, I can say a lot more about pain. I'll just mention briefly that the felt sense, the internalized sense of social support it's called, that others are with you, they have compassion for you, warm-heartedness, literally dials down pain circuitry in the brain. Social support dials down physical pain processing. That's pretty amazing. And so another resource that helps us deal with chronic pain is the feel that others are with us, they have compassion for us, and that we have compassion for ourselves. Or related to that, just simply resting in lovingness while being in a lot of pain. Still resting in the lovingness of your own heart. That will help people. That helps people cope with pain, and that sense of trait compassion, trait kindness, trait lovingness, trait self-compassion is a resource we can acquire with practice over time that is gradually hardwired into our own body. So certainly you can use these methods for chronic pain. You can use these methods, which are really about how to grow the good inside ourselves, right? Feel it, internalize it. That's how to grow the good. So we can apply that to growing any particular resource for anything we're dealing with these days, including anxiety or loneliness or outrage during this time of Corona. One thing I want to mention before we go, and I'll wrap up in just a few minutes here. When I glance down, I'm looking at my clock here to see where I am with time, is generosity. I want to say that during this time in which things are taken away from people, it's weirdly healing and powerful, and I think, frankly, deeply benevolent and virtuous to also be aware of givingness, contribution. How can we be helpful? They're in trouble too. They're scared too. They're hurting too. They're dealing with massive shortfalls too, whoever they are. So for me, with regard to life in general these days, riding the wave of generosity, not altruistic, it's called pathological altruism, not overgiving, not burning yourself out, nothing like that. Giving in a way that opens the heart and helps you. For me, it's been important to give to the Garrison Institute, to be generous there. And you might be generous in one way or another with your time, your service, perhaps your pocketbook, perhaps likes on social media, something like that. There's something in us that calms down the stress response when we can move more into the open heart. It's interesting that Shelley Taylor, professor at UCLA, has developed this whole body of work about dealing with stress through tending and befriending. Her original work was particularly about how women dealt with stress, not necessarily by fighting and fleeing, but through tending and befriending, really broadly beyond gender categories to the extent they're at all meaningful anyway. Obviously, women fight or flee, men tend and befriend. So that said, tend and befriend. Besides its moral value for other people, it's instant stress relief ourselves. And also it helps bring a sense of worth and agency. There's so much we can't change, so much we can't affect around us, terrible things we can't affect around us. Meanwhile, locally, we can tend and befriend. We can tend and befriend others, we can plant a flower, we can tend and befriend ourselves. And in the process of that, experience the application of that kind of generosity locally in the circle of what we can actually influence. So I hope you'll join me in being generous to the Garrison Institute. Okay, I think we're moving to the end here. Pretty soon we're going to need to return to mission control. A lot of great questions came in. I'm sorry, there's just no way I can respond to them all. I encourage you to check out my website, tons of freely offered resources there, short guided practices, talks, videos, slide sets for professionals. You're welcome to take them and use them however you like. And you can see a lot more of the scientific backup on all this stuff. And you can learn more about engaging this material in a deeper way through different online programs I have, including one related to the neurodharma book. Okay. Amy, back to you, mission control.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being with us today. I learned a lot about how the mechanics of meditation, and I hope you did too. So we've listed Dr. Hanson's website in the chat box. It's www.rickhanson.net. And our next session is this Friday, May 29th, with Ethan Nickdern and our very own Jane Collini. Please keep checking garrisoninstitute.org for updated listings of future sessions and to view the recording of this meeting and others. Again, we provide these sessions free of charge. So if you would like to support this effort, please consider making a donation at garrisoninstitute.org. May you all be safe, happy, and healthy. Thank you.